There's a moment in everyone's life when you realize how much your parents have sacrificed for you. For me, that moment came one quiet Sunday morning when I found myself staring at my bank account, fingers trembling over the confirm payment button for something I'd dreamed of giving my dad my entire life, his own brand new truck. I grew up watching him fix other people's cars, using old wrenches and his bare hands while his own truck sat rusting behind our house. It was an old blue pickup from the early 90s, the kind that coughed when you turned the key and rattled like it was begging for mercy. He never complained. Not once. Whenever I'd ask him why he didn't get something newer, he'd just smile and say, "It still runs, doesn't it?" Back then, I didn't understand what that really meant. Now, at 32, I did. "It still runs" was his way of saying we can't afford anything else right now. Dad was never the type of man who asked for help. After Mom passed away when I was 15, he took on 2 jobs, working in a small auto shop during the day and delivering groceries in the evenings. He'd come home exhausted, hands covered in grease, but he always greeted me with a tired smile and a simple, "Did you eat yet, kiddo?" That's who he was. Steady, reliable, always putting everyone else before himself. So, when his 60th birthday started approaching, I decided it was time to do something that showed him just how much his sacrifices meant to me. I didn't have a fortune, but I'd been saving quietly for years, setting aside every bonus, skipping vacations, ignoring every impulsive purchase. My dream wasn't to buy something flashy for myself, but to give my dad the one thing he'd never buy for himself: comfort. After months of searching, I found it. A silver Ford F-150. Not brand new from the factory, but barely a year old, spotless, and perfect. It had leather seats, a smooth engine, and that new car smell that made you feel like life was good again. I could already imagine him sitting behind the wheel, resting his calloused hands on the steering wheel, eyes glistening like a kid on Christmas morning. That image alone made every long work hour worth it. The day I picked it up, I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. It was a warm Saturday, the kind that made the sunlight dance off the hood like glitter. As I drove it home, I couldn't help but smile. I had never felt so proud of anything I'd done. I kept picturing his face when he saw it. Dad's house was still the same old place, white paint fading, the same crooked mailbox he refused to replace because it's still good. I parked the truck in front of the porch and honked twice. He came out wearing his old baseball cap, wiping his hands with a rag. For a moment, he didn't notice the truck. He just waved at me like he always did. Then his eyes shifted. He froze. His mouth dropped open just slightly, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Whose truck is that?" he asked, squinting. I smiled. "Yours, Dad. Happy 60th. He laughed. Not the usual kind of laugh, but one that sounded nervous and confused. "No, seriously, whose is it?" "Yours," I repeated, holding out the keys. "I bought it for you." He didn't move for a few seconds. The rag slipped from his hands and fell onto the porch. His eyes got glassy, and he shook his head slowly. You couldn't have done that, son." "I could, and I did." He walked closer, his fingers brushing over the shiny metal. The sunlight caught his face, and I saw the deep lines around his eyes. The same eyes that once watched over me when I was sick, when he stayed up nights fixing broken appliances, because we couldn't afford new ones. He ran a hand along the hood like he was afraid it might disappear. "You bought me a truck?" "Yeah," I said softly. "You've spent your whole life giving to everyone else. I just wanted to give something back." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he turned, and to my surprise, he hugged me tight. He wasn't a man who showed affection easily, but that hug said more than any words could. "You're something else," he murmured. "I don't deserve this." "You deserve everything, Dad," I whispered back. We spent the next hour sitting inside the truck, He turned the key over and over, just to hear the smooth rumble of the engine. He kept touching the dashboard like a child with a new toy, grinning wider every minute. "Leather seats," he said, running his hand over them. "You're spoiling an old man." "About time someone did," I teased. He looked at me with this mix of pride and disbelief. "You know, I used to dream about owning something like this back when I was your age, but life had other plans." I nodded. "Yeah, I know." He chuckled softly, glancing out the window. "Your mom would have loved this. She always said I'd get my dream truck one day. Guess she was right." For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was something in his voice when he said that, something heavy, like he wasn't just talking about a truck. When he finally turned to me again, he said, "You didn't have to do this, you know. Having you here is enough." "I know," I said, "but sometimes words aren't enough either." That evening, I helped him polish the truck, even though it didn't need it. He insisted on washing the windshield, wiping down the mirrors, and cleaning out invisible dust from the back seat. He was treating it like a treasure, and honestly it was one. As the sun set, we stood by the truck, looking at it gleam under the golden light. Dad sighed contentedly, hands on his hips. "This might be the best birthday I've ever had," he said. I smiled. "Just wait until dinner tonight." He raised an eyebrow. "You're planning something, aren't you?" "Maybe," I said, pretending to be mysterious. He chuckled again. "As long as there's steak, I'm in." "There's steak," I promised. That night, the family was coming over. My sister, my cousins, a few close friends. It wasn't just a birthday dinner. It was a celebration of everything he'd done for us. As I drove home to get ready, I caught a glimpse of him through the rearview mirror. He was still standing by the truck, running his hand across the hood, his face soft with quiet joy. For the first time in years, I saw him not as the tired, overworked man who raised me, but as the dreamer he used to be, the man who once had hopes for himself before life forced him to give them up. And I promised myself one thing. No matter what happened, I'd make sure he knew how much I loved him. I didn't know it then, but the words he'd say later that night, when he raised his glass during dinner, would change everything I thought I knew about him, and about love itself. That evening felt different. The air itself seemed softer somehow, like the world had decided to slow down for us. Just for one night, the sun dipped below the trees, painting the sky in warm orange and rose. Through the open kitchen window, I could smell garlic bread baking, the faint crackle of butter sizzling on the pan. I wanted this dinner to be perfect. Not fancy, just filled with love and laughter. My sister Anna had arrived an hour early with her husband and 2 kids, arms full of groceries. She was always the one in charge of decor, meaning she'd cover every surface with candles and string lights until the house looked like a tiny restaurant. When Dad walked into the kitchen, still wearing his old plaid shirt and baseball cap, Anna dropped the spoon she was stirring with and gasped. "Dad, you're glowing," she laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. He grinned. "It's called happiness, sweetheart. Your brothers got me acting like a kid again." She turned to me with raised eyebrows. "You told him." I nodded toward the driveway. "Go look for yourself." A few seconds later, her surprised squeal echoed from outside. "Oh my God, you actually did it." Dad chuckled. "That's what I said too." It felt good, hearing them laugh, seeing everyone together again. For the first time in a long while, Dad's house didn't feel empty. There were voices, footsteps, and the kind of warmth that doesn't come from candles, but from family being close. As dinner came together, Dad moved around greeting everyone, neighbors, old friends from his auto shop, even Mrs. Turner from next door, who'd baked him a pie, because 60 is too special for store-bought. Everyone had a story about Dad. Some talked about how he'd fix their car for free when they were broke. Others mentioned how he never forgot birthdays, even when he barely remembered his own. It hit me then. How much quiet goodness he had poured into this town, this family, this life. When the table was finally set, Dad sat at the head seat, his rightful throne, while we gathered around him. The golden light from the string bulbs shimmered across the table. Plates of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables, and his favorite, sirloin steak with mushroom sauce, filled the air with rich, comforting smells. I caught him glancing toward the window where the new truck sat parked under the porch light. Every time his gaze fell on it, his lips curved into this small, peaceful smile. It wasn't the kind of grin you wear for pictures. It was quieter, grateful. We started dinner with jokes and memories. Anna's husband teased Dad about his obsession with coffee, and Dad fired back about his bald spot. The kids giggled. Someone spilled juice. For once, there was no tension, no rush. Just family. Halfway through the meal, I noticed Dad had barely eaten. He was too busy listening, eyes darting from one person to another, soaking in the moment like he didn't want to forget it. "You okay, Dad?" I asked softly. He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm better than okay. I just can't believe everyone's here. It's been years since we all sat down like this." Anna reached across the table, touching his hand. "You deserve it, Dad. All of this." He looked at her for a long moment before smiling faintly. "You know, I always thought turning 60 would feel like the beginning of the end." He paused, exhaling. "But sitting here with you all, it feels like the start of something better." Everyone went quiet for a second, not out of sadness, but because his words carried weight. I looked at him and said, "You're not done yet, old man." He laughed. "Well, I hope not. I've got a new truck to break in." After dinner, we moved to the living room. The kids chased each other with paper hats. Anna poured wine, and Dad insisted on playing his old record player. The crackle of vinyl filled the space with soft blues music, the kind Mom used to hum while cooking. I sat beside him on the couch, watching him stare at a photo on the mantel, a picture of Mom from when they were young. She was sitting on the hood of their first car, smiling like the world was theirs. "She'd love the truck," I said quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, she'd probably be the first to drive it, too." That made both of us laugh. For a few seconds, it felt like she was right there in the room with us. In the laughter, the light, the smell of food that lingered. Dad leaned back, sighing. "You know, I used to worry that I'd never see you two together like this again. After your mom passed, it felt like everything just scattered." I nodded. I remembered those years, the loneliness that crept in between us. He worked late. I buried myself in school. We both thought keeping busy was the way to cope, but it only made us distant. "I missed a lot of time," he said softly. "You gave us everything you had." I replied, "That's what matters." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "I just wanted you to have more than I ever did." That simple line hit me harder than I expected, because that was exactly why I'd bought the truck. He'd spent his whole life giving, and I wanted him to finally receive. As the night went on, laughter filled every corner of that little house. We told stories from when we were kids, like the time he built us a tree house that collapsed the same day, or when he tried to cook spaghetti and ended up setting off the smoke alarm. At one point, Anna's youngest climbed onto his lap and said, "Grandpa, you're old now. Do old people still get birthdays?" Everyone burst out laughing. Dad ruffled the boy's hair. "Only the lucky ones, buddy." It was such a small line, but it carried something beautiful, a quiet gratitude for being alive, for having us around, for still being part of this world. When dessert came, Anna's homemade chocolate cake, we dimmed the lights. The kids carried the cake to the table while we all sang. Dad's smile didn't fade for a second. As he blew out the candles, I caught him whispering something under his breath. "What did you wish for?" Anna teased. He smiled. "Nothing. I've already got it." We clapped and cheered. It felt like the perfect ending to a perfect night. But as the laughter faded and plates began to clear, I saw Dad reach for his glass again. He stood up slowly, his chair creaking behind him. The room quieted. Everyone turned toward him. He raised his glass slightly, his hand trembling just a bit. His eyes shimmered under the warm light. "I just want to say something," he began. Tonight's been one of the best nights of my life. Seeing all of you here, my family, my friends, it's more than I ever hoped for." We all smiled, waiting for him to go on. He looked at me, his voice soft but steady. "And to my son, you gave me a gift I never thought I'd have. That truck out there, it's beautiful. But what means more to me is why you gave it." My throat tightened. He continued, "You made me realize something tonight. Sometimes we think we're giving, but we're really repaying love that was given long before we knew it." He paused, took a slow breath, and glanced at the photo of Mom on the mantel. "But before this night ends, there's something I need to say. Something I've kept to myself for a long time." The laughter faded. The kids went quiet. He looked back at me, eyes glistening with something between pride and sorrow. "I need to tell you the truth about that old truck of mine," he said. And just like that, the night shifted. The warmth in the room turned into stillness. Everyone's eyes were on him. My heart began to race, though I didn't know why yet. He raised his glass again, his voice trembling this time. "I didn't sell it because it broke down," he said quietly. "I sold it because..." He stopped, took another deep breath, and that's when I realized whatever he was about to say next wasn't just a story about a truck. It was a story about everything he'd done for us, and everything I'd never known. The clinking of glasses faded into silence. The hum of the ceiling fan was suddenly the only sound in the room. Every face around the table was turned toward my dad, whose eyes shimmered with a strange mix of gratitude and something deeper, a quiet sadness that didn't belong to a celebration. He held his wine glass just below his chin, fingers trembling slightly, as if the weight of what he was about to say was pressing down on him. His gaze met mine for a long moment, before drifting toward the window, where his new silver truck gleamed softly under the porch light. "That old truck I used to drive," he began, voice low but steady, "the one that barely made it up the hill anymore. I didn't get rid of it, because it died on me." A faint murmur rippled through the room. My sister frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean, Dad?" He sighed, his shoulders lowering, as if exhaling years of secrets. "I sold it because I had to." He paused, his hand tightening around the stem of the glass. "Back when you were in college," he continued, looking at me, "things were harder than I let on. Money was tight, tighter than you ever knew." I froze. "What are you talking about?" He smiled faintly, a sad kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You remember when your tuition got raised your sophomore year? You called me panicked, said you'd take a break, and work for a while to cover it." I nodded slowly. I remembered that day vividly. I was standing outside the registrar's office, embarrassed, heart pounding, trying not to cry. He had called me back 10 minutes later and said, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." He chuckled softly, but there was no humor in it. "I told you I got a little bonus at work. Truth is, I didn't." The room went still. My sister's fork clinked against her plate. "I sold the truck," he said simply. "Every piece of it. I sold it to a guy down in Fairview for $3,000. Used every penny to cover your tuition that semester." My heart sank. I tried to speak, but no words came. "I walked to the shop for nearly a year," he went on. "Sometimes caught rides with neighbors. Sometimes in the rain. I didn't tell you because I knew if I did, you'd have dropped out." He took a long sip of wine and set the glass down gently. I figured one old man walking was a small price to pay for his son's future. The room was dead quiet. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. My chest felt tight, and suddenly, the shiny silver truck outside didn't feel like enough. Not compared to what he had given up all those years ago. "Dad," I managed to whisper, but my voice cracked. He waved his hand gently. "Don't look like that, son. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I couldn't let this night pass without telling the truth." His eyes softened as he looked around the table. "You all see that truck outside and think it's a gift. But to me, it's a reminder of what love looks like when it comes full circle." My sister reached across the table and took his hand. "Dad, why didn't you tell us? We could have helped." He smiled again, shaking his head. "You were both just kids trying to find your place in the world. I didn't want you to worry. A parent's job isn't to burden their children. It's to carry the load quietly." That last word, quietly, hit me hard, because that was exactly what he had done my entire life. Quiet sacrifices, quiet love, quiet strength. I thought about all the mornings he left before sunrise, all the dinners he skipped because he was working late, all the times he said, "I'm fine," when I knew he wasn't. And now, hearing it laid out like this, I realized how blind I'd been to the quiet heroism that had built my life. Dad sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "When I sold that old truck, I promised myself I'd buy another one someday. But time got away from me, and life had other priorities." His eyes drifted again to the window, where the porch light gleamed off the new Ford. "I guess tonight, that promise finally came true, just not the way I expected." Tears burned behind my eyes. I tried to keep my composure, but it was useless. I stood up, the chair scraping softly against the floor. "Dad, you..." He raised a hand to stop me. "Let me finish, son." I sank back down. He cleared his throat, his voice cracking just slightly now. "There's one more thing you should know. When your mom got sick, before she passed, she made me promise 2 things. Anna's eyes widened. "What things?" He smiled weakly. "First, to never stop believing that our kids would make something of themselves. And second, to keep that old truck running as long as I could. She said it would remind me to keep going no matter what." A tear rolled down his cheek. He wiped it quickly with the back of his hand, but his voice trembled when he spoke again. "When I sold it, I felt like I broke that promise. For years, I carried that guilt. Every time I saw someone driving a truck, like mine, it felt like she was looking down, shaking her head. My heart ached. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Dad, you didn't break anything. You did what you had to do, for us." He looked up at me, eyes shining. "Maybe. But when you gave me that new truck today, for the first time in years, I felt like I'd made things right again. Like, maybe she'd forgive me." There was a lump in my throat, so big, I could barely breathe. I looked around. My sister was crying silently, her husband rubbing her shoulder. Even the kids sat still, sensing the weight of the moment. Dad picked up his glass again. His hand steadied this time. "So tonight," he said, his voice breaking just slightly, "I want to make a toast. Not to the truck, not even to my birthday, but to the kind of love that doesn't fade with time, the kind that keeps driving forward, even when the road gets rough." He raised his glass toward me. "To you, son. You made an old man proud." I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I stood up, walked around the table, and hugged him. Hard. His shoulders shook beneath my arms. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered. "For everything." He whispered back, "You already thanked me. The moment you drove up in that truck." When we finally sat down again, the mood was softer. The tears had turned into quiet smiles. Someone turned the record player back on, and that old blues melody filled the room again, gentle and forgiving. Dad leaned back in his chair, looking more peaceful than I'd seen him in years. The lines on his face seemed lighter, his eyes brighter. Outside, the silver truck gleamed under the moonlight, and for a strange moment, I swore I could almost see Mom's reflection in the window, smiling. Dad raised his glass one last time and said quietly, "She's happy tonight. I can feel it." I believed him. The room felt frozen in time. After Dad's toast, no one moved for a long moment. The only sound was the faint hum of the record spinning, the same soft blues melody that Mom used to love. Dad set his empty glass down slowly, fingertips tracing the rim as if collecting courage from its cool surface. Then, with a deep breath, he looked up. His eyes, those kind, weathered eyes, met mine again. "I need to tell you the whole story," he said quietly. Something in his voice made my stomach twist. I thought the confession was over. That selling the old truck to pay for my college tuition was the big revelation. But his tone told me there was more, something deeper. Anna glanced at me nervously, as if to ask whether we should stop him, but I shook my head. Whatever this was, he needed to say it. Dad folded his hands together, the knuckles rough and scarred from decades of hard work. "When your mom got sick," he began slowly, "things got bad fast. We didn't have much saved, and the insurance didn't cover everything. I did what I could, worked extra hours, borrowed money from friends, anything to keep up with the hospital bills." He looked down for a moment, his voice barely a whisper. But it still wasn't enough. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I'd known things were hard back then, but I'd been a teenager, too young, too selfish to see the full picture. Dad went on. "One night, after another long shift, I came home and found your mom sitting at the kitchen table. She had all the bills spread out, her head in her hands. When she looked up, she smiled, but I could tell she'd been crying. She said, 'Robert, you have to promise me something.'" He paused, swallowing hard. "She told me to make sure you both stayed in school, that no matter what happened to her, you and your sister would never have to give up your futures because of money." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "So I promised her," he said softly. "I promised her I'd do whatever it took." A single tear slipped down his cheek, glinting in the light. When she passed, I felt like I failed her. I didn't just lose my wife. I lost my partner, my balance. I didn't know how to keep things together anymore. The bills kept coming. The shop started cutting my hours. I was terrified I'd lose the house. He rubbed his temples with both hands. That's when I started selling things. First, the lawnmower, then the tools I didn't use anymore, then the old truck. He looked at me then, eyes full of pain and pride all at once. I told myself it was just a truck, just metal and wheels. But that truck was how your mom and I built our life together. We took road trips in it. We drove you home from the hospital in it. We used to park by the lake and talk about our dreams in it. Selling it felt like selling a piece of our story. My chest tightened. I could picture them. Two young people sitting in that old truck, windows down, laughing, dreaming, believing life would always be kind. He sighed heavily, but I did it anyway, because a promise is a promise. My sister wiped her tears with a napkin, her voice trembling. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell us any of this?" He smiled faintly, the kind of sad smile that says more than words. "Because I didn't want your memories of her to be tied to hardship. I wanted you to remember her laugh, her warmth, her cooking. Not the hospital, not the bills, not the nights I cried in the garage so you wouldn't hear." The room fell silent again. Even the kids, who had been quietly playing in the corner, seemed to feel the gravity of his words. I swallowed hard. "Dad, all those years you spent struggling, you carried that alone?" He nodded slowly. "Someone had to. You were building your lives. That's what your mom wanted." Something inside me broke a little. The guilt washed over me like a wave. All those years I'd thought he was fine. All those times I'd said, "I'll pay you back one day," like it was just a phrase. And now, here I was, realizing that repayment wasn't even the point. He'd never done it expecting anything in return. He did it out of love, the kind that asks for nothing but gives everything. He leaned back, exhaling deeply, as if the truth itself had taken the last of his strength. "When you gave me that new truck today," he said softly, "I didn't just see a vehicle. I saw a full circle. I saw a son who turned out better than I ever hoped. I saw your mom's wish come true." Tears blurred my vision. I couldn't even speak. Dad smiled gently. "You know, for years I've been driving other people's cars, fixing their engines, making sure they could get where they needed to go. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to drive something that was truly mine." He paused, eyes distant. "When I sat in that truck today, for the first time in years, I felt free again. Like I could breathe. Like she was sitting next to me, telling me I'd done enough." Anna stood and walked behind his chair, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "You have done enough, Dad," she whispered. "More than enough." He reached up and patted her hand, smiling. "Thank you, sweetheart." After a moment, he turned his gaze toward me again. "You know what's funny?" he said softly. "When I was young, I thought love was about big gestures. Expensive gifts, fancy dinners, grand words. But as I got older, I realized love is quieter. It's working an extra shift. It's walking home in the rain so your kid can have gas money. It's giving up your dreams so someone else can chase theirs." He let out a shaky breath. "You don't see it at the time, but that's love in its truest form." I felt tears slipping down my face again, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted him to see them. "Dad," I said, my voice breaking, "I bought that truck to thank you. But now I realize there's no gift in the world that could ever match what you gave us." He smiled, eyes soft. "You already gave me everything I could ever want, son. You gave me peace." The moment felt timeless. There was no music now, no chatter, no noise from outside, just the sound of our breathing and the faint rustle of the curtains in the breeze. Then slowly, Dad pushed back his chair and stood up. He walked to the window, looking out at the silver truck parked in the driveway. The porch light shimmered across its polished surface. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think that truck represented failure, the proof that I couldn't keep my promises. But now it feels like forgiveness." He turned back toward me. "Thank you, son, for reminding me that love never really goes away. It just changes form." As he sat back down, something shifted inside me, a deep understanding I hadn't felt before. I realized that all the things I thought mattered, the job, the money, the success, were nothing compared to what he'd built. A family bound by sacrifice and love. Anna reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. Across the table, Dad looked tired but peaceful, like a man who had finally unburdened his soul. That night, as we helped clear the dishes, I caught him stepping outside. He stood by the truck, resting his hand on the hood, whispering something I couldn't hear. Maybe it was a thank you to Mom. Maybe it was goodbye to the past. Whatever it was, I knew one thing for certain. The man who had spent his life fixing things had finally found something he didn't need to fix anymore. His heart. That night lingered in my heart like the echo of a long-forgotten song. After Dad's confession, it felt like something heavy had finally lifted, but in its place was a silence so deep it demanded reflection. The others had gone to bed. The house was dimly lit now, shadows stretching across the living room floor. Dad was still outside, sitting on the porch steps, his back slightly hunched, the faint orange glow of his cigarette flickering in the dark. I stood in the doorway for a while watching him. The cool night air smelled faintly of pine and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. I grabbed 2 mugs from the kitchen, poured us some coffee, and stepped outside. He looked up when he heard the door creak, his expression softening as I handed him a cup. Couldn't sleep? He asked. I shook my head, sitting beside him. Not after all that. He nodded slowly, taking a sip. Yeah, I guess I said a lot tonight. Been holding that in for a long time. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The night hummed quietly. The crickets, the distant sound of cars, the gentle rustle of trees. Finally, I said, Dad, I don't even know what to say. I feel like I've spent my whole life taking you for granted. He chuckled softly. That's just how kids are. You're not supposed to see everything your parents go through. You just live your life. That's what we want for you. I know, I murmured. But still you gave up so much. I wish I could go back and help. Do something. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the porch light, tired, lined, but peaceful. Son, listen to me, he said. If I could go back and do it all again, I would. Every hour I worked, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, it was worth it. You and your sister turned out kind, hardworking, decent people. That's all I ever wanted. I stared down at my coffee, the steam curling like ghosts in the air. I just wish Mom could see this, I whispered. He smiled faintly. She can. She's here. He looked out at the truck parked in the driveway. When I sat in that driver's seat earlier today, I could almost hear her laugh, like she was teasing me for being sentimental. I think she'd be proud of both of us. Something about the way he said that, calm, certain, made my throat tighten. You know, he continued, when you were little, your mom used to say that every child carries their parents' story inside them. The good parts, the struggles, all of it. She said that's how love outlives us. I didn't understand what she meant back then, but I do now. I felt tears prick my eyes again. So, when I gave you that truck today, he smiled knowingly. You gave me back a piece of her. We sat there for a long while, just drinking coffee and watching the stars appear one by one. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was full of understanding, full of everything we hadn't said for years. After a while, I asked, Dad, do you ever regret it? The life you could have had if you hadn't spent it all on us. He laughed gently. You mean, do I regret loving my family more than myself? Not for a second. He leaned back, stretching his legs. Sure, I had dreams, we all do. I wanted to travel, maybe open my own repair shop one day. But life has a funny way of choosing for you. And sometimes, what you get instead of your dreams turns out better. He turned toward me, because what I got was you kids. Watching you grow, make your own choices, learn, fail, get back up. That's been the real journey. That's what made my life full. I looked at him, realizing something that should have been obvious all along. My father wasn't just someone who worked hard. He was someone who lived for others quietly, faithfully, without ever needing applause. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Love isn't about keeping score. It's about showing up, again and again, even when no one's watching. He took a deep breath and smiled at the night sky. You know what the hardest part of getting older is. What? I asked. It's realizing you spend so much of your life worrying about doing things right, when all that really matters is being there. Half the time, I didn't know what I was doing. I just hoped I was doing enough. I swallowed hard. You did, Dad. More than enough. He looked at me then, really looked at me and nodded. Thank you, son. That means more than you'll ever know. We fell quiet again, but this time, the quiet felt sacred. Like two souls finally seeing each other, without the noise of the world in between. After a while, I stood up and said, Come on, let's take it for a drive. He blinked, surprised. The truck? Yeah, I said, smiling. It's yours. You should be the first to take it out for a proper ride. He hesitated, but the corner of his mouth lifted into a grin. Well, don't have to tell me twice. We climbed into the truck, the leather seats cool against our backs. The dashboard lights flickered on softly, glowing amber and blue. When he turned the key, The engine purred to life, smooth, strong, full of promise. He gripped the steering wheel, eyes glimmering with that youthful spark I hadn't seen in years. "She's a beauty," he said, his voice trembling with pride. I nodded. "She's yours, Dad." He backed out of the driveway carefully, his hands steady, movements deliberate. As we drove down the quiet suburban streets, the headlights cutting through the darkness, I felt like time had rewound, like I was a kid again, riding shotgun while he told me stories about life and work and love. He didn't talk much during the drive. He didn't need to. The hum of the engine, the soft whoosh of the wind, that was enough. After a few minutes, he said softly, "You know, it's been years since I drove without worrying about the next bill or the next repair. I forgot how peaceful the road can be." I smiled. "Feels like freedom, doesn't it?" He nodded. "Yeah, feels like forgiveness." We ended up at the old lakeside park, the one Mom loved. The moonlight shimmered over the water, painting silver ripples across its surface. Dad parked by the edge, turned off the engine, and sat in silence. "She used to love this place," he said quietly. "We'd sit here for hours, talking about everything and nothing." I could almost see her there, her laughter carried by the wind, her hand resting on his. Dad turned to me, his voice thick with emotion. "I miss her every day, but nights like this, I feel like she's not gone, like she's just in the next room, waiting for me to finish my story." I felt tears welling up again, but this time they weren't heavy. They were freeing, cleansing. I reached over and placed my hand on his shoulder. "She's proud of you, Dad, of everything you've done, and so am I." He didn't answer right away. He just nodded, his jaw tightening, his eyes glistening. Then, finally, he whispered, "Thank you, son. That means more than you'll ever know." We sat there for a long time, 2 generations of love and sacrifice, watching the reflection of the stars in the water. The truck, gleaming silent, felt like a symbol of everything we'd both lost and found again. For the first time in years, I saw my father not just as Dad, but as a man, flawed, strong human. A man who had lived through pain and still chosen love. And in that realization, something healed inside me too. That night, as we drove home, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Every turn of the wheel, every mile we passed, said all that words could not. By the time we pulled into the driveway, I knew that this wasn't just his birthday gift. It was our closure. The sky was still dark when I woke up the next morning. A soft chill lingered in the air, and the house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels peaceful rather than empty. For a moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying everything from the night before. Dad's words, his tears, his forgiveness. I got up, walked to the window, and saw the new truck parked in the driveway, glinting faintly under the first light of dawn. The sight filled me with warmth, and something deeper. Gratitude, maybe, or understanding. Downstairs, I could hear faint movement in the kitchen. I followed the smell of coffee and bacon, smiling to myself. There he was, my dad, standing by the stove, humming softly, wearing that old gray t-shirt I'd bought him years ago. "Morning," I said, leaning against the doorframe. He turned, smiling. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Too much on my mind." He chuckled. "Same here. Figured I'd make us some breakfast. Old habits die hard." The morning light poured through the curtains, bathing the room in a warm, golden hue. The way it touched his face made him look younger, almost like the man I remembered from my childhood, strong, steady, unbreakable. I poured myself some coffee and sat at the table. For a few minutes, neither of us said much. We didn't need to. The silence between us had changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable, full of peace. When he finally sat down, I asked, "So, how was your night?" He grinned. "Didn't sleep much. Took the truck out again. around midnight. I laughed. Seriously? He nodded, eyes twinkling. Couldn't resist. I ended up driving through town, then out to the highway. No traffic, no noise, just me and the road. It felt like starting over. I smiled, my heart swelling. You deserve that, Dad. You really do. He looked at me thoughtfully, then said something that caught me off guard. You know, son, I spent most of my life thinking about the things I couldn't give you. The fancy vacations, the private schools, the easy life. But last night, sitting behind that wheel, I realized something. You didn't need those things. What you needed was me. And even when I didn't have much, I still had love to give. I stared at him, speechless for a moment. And you gave it, Dad. You gave more than enough. He smiled faintly. Maybe. But it took me a long time to forgive myself for the things I couldn't do. He sipped his coffee, eyes distant. I think that's what getting old is, really. Learning to let go of all the times you thought you failed. A few minutes later, we sat outside on the porch steps, just like we used to when I was a kid. The sun was climbing higher now, spilling soft gold across the neighborhood. Birds chirped, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Dad looked out at the truck, parked proudly in the driveway. You know, when I first saw it yesterday, I thought, this is too much. It's too fancy, too expensive, too big of a gesture for a man like me. He chuckled quietly. But now I see it differently. It's not just a gift. It's a reminder. A reminder of what? I asked. He turned to me, eyes glistening with that familiar tenderness. That all the small things I did over the years, the late nights, the overtime, the worrying, they mattered, even when no one noticed. This truck, this moment, it's proof that love doesn't disappear into the background. It circles back. Always. His words sank deep into my heart. You know what else it reminded me of? He continued. Your mom. She used to say life is like driving at night. You can only see as far as your headlights go, but that's enough to get you home. I felt my throat tighten again. That sounds like her. He smiled. Yeah, she had a way with words, didn't she? We sat there in silence, letting her memory fill the space between us. For the first time, I felt her presence not as a loss, but as something alive, woven into everything we were. After breakfast, the rest of the family began to wake. My sister joined us on the porch with her kids, still in their pajamas, giggling and running around the truck like it was some magical toy. Dad watched them with pure joy, his eyes soft and proud. Anna turned to me and whispered, I don't think I've seen him this happy in years. I nodded. It's like he finally let go of something. Dad must have overheard because he smiled and said, You're both right. I think I finally made peace with my life. He stood up and called out to the kids, Hey, who wants a ride in Grandpa's new truck? They squealed with excitement, and within seconds, the cab was filled with laughter. I watched as he helped them climb in, carefully buckling each seatbelt, checking every latch, still the same meticulous man he'd always been. As the engine started and the truck rolled down the driveway, I realized something beautiful. The same vehicle that had once symbolized loss for him now symbolized renewal. It wasn't about the metal or the price tag. It was about love coming full circle. When they returned, Dad stepped out of the truck with the biggest smile I'd seen in years. That, he said, was the best drive of my life. We all laughed, and he hugged each of us, tight, lingering, meaningful. When he finally turned to me, his voice was low but steady. Son, he said, you didn't just give me a truck. You gave me back time. Time I thought was gone forever. I felt tears prick my eyes. You gave me everything I have, Dad. This is just my way of saying thank you. He placed his hand on my shoulder. Then we're even. I shook my head. Not even close. He chuckled. Fair enough. Later that afternoon, after everyone had gone home, Dad and I sat together one last time by the truck. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. He sighed, deeply content. I used to think life was about building something that lasts, a business, a house, a name. But now I see it differently. I looked at him, curious. How do you see it? He smiled softly. Life's about the people who carry your love forward. That's what lasts. Not things, hearts. The words hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. He looked out at the horizon and said, almost to himself, when my time comes, I don't want anyone to say I left behind money or property. I just hope they'll say, he loved well. That'll be enough. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. They'll say that, Dad. I promise. He turned to me and grinned. Then I've done my job. That night, after I drove home, I sat alone in my car for a long time, thinking. The story of my father's life, of love, sacrifice, and quiet strength, replayed in my mind like a movie. I realized that sometimes the greatest gifts aren't the ones wrapped in boxes or tied with ribbons. They're the moments, the conversations, the forgiveness, the understanding that remind us who we are and where we come from. And as I watched the moon rise, I whispered a silent promise to myself, to live the way he did, to love the way he did, because, in the end, that's what truly lasts.